I finally got this camera to work on my main computer. My main computer crashed, and what happened was the registry got corrupted. So I still got all my old programs on the computer, but the computer doesn't know where they are now. So I had to reinstall, which means, I haven't reinstalled BibleWorks yet, so it might be a while before I can make a BibleWorks video on this machine. I'll have to see. But at least, as you can see, the camera's now working, and it wasn't working before. Now, that's the introduction to this video about logic. Because where's the logic that the registry, if it gets corrupted, can't tell what programs are installed, because the registry has to tell it what programs are already there. So if it's not in the registry, then it can't read anything on the machine. That's an illogic. That's a stupid, fatal flaw in Windows. Okay? There are many fatal flaws in Windows. I hate Windows. If I used it for my business, I'd never be in business. Okay? But it's a fatal flaw. The premise on which Windows stands is that there has to be some list called a registry that tells you what's on the machine. That's a tautology, see, because it could actually be on the machine. But if it's not in the registry's going to say it doesn't exist. That's the point. If the registry doesn't say it exists, as far as Windows is concerned, it doesn't exist, even though it exists on the machine. Keep that in mind as I'm going to go through what I say now. Okay, here's our next test in logic. All right, watch. See, you see me now, and of course, this camera has Princess and Dragon Lady, so I have to use the Princess setting or you'll never watch, right? So I look better than I really do. Sorry, I either look better or worse. Now watch this. Now I put on my glasses. Don't I look smarter because I have glasses on? Where's the logic in that? Why do we think that people who wear glasses are smarter than those who don't? It's a cultural norm. Because professors often have to wear glasses. So, now the glasses are off. And I look dumber. I look like I'm prettier. So I must be dumb. That's another illogic. You getting the point? Is that we, like the registry, are telling ourselves certain things are true and false based on a mindset that we already have in here. That's our registry. We have values that come from our culture or come from our own decisions, and we say a thing is true or not true based on our own registry up here, and we don't question those premises. If it's not in here in our registry, then we think the thing doesn't exist or is something, whatever this thing tells us it is. That's what it is. And we have a real hard time getting rid of these ideas. Just like Windows can't recognize a program that's there because it's not in the registry. So what we all need to do, believer and unbeliever alike, is check our premises. Okay? I've done a lot of videos lately you've seen me do about how the Catholic Church says that Christ died on Good Friday in the Bible, which is not in the Catholic registry. The Bible says, no, 3 days and 3 nights in the grave. So Catholicism can't even count to 3. And 2,000 years have gone by. Matthew 12, 40, and 41 has been in the Bible since about 30 AD when Matthew wrote it. And yes, it's 30 AD, not later. And it was originally in Greek, not Hebrew. And you can prove all that from the text. But it's not in, a whole lot of people don't have that in their registry, and so they just dismiss the idea. They don't bother to go back to the text to examine de novo. All right? The Catholics still say Good Friday. Doesn't matter what the Bible says. That's illogical. It doesn't matter. It's not in their registry. Atheists, they insist that there has to be visible proof of God. That's in their registry. Or God doesn't exist. Now, the total illogic of that is real obvious. If God exists, he's not visible. Anything that's visible is finite. The definition of God isn't worth the definition of God unless it's infinite. Okay? If you had, like in the polytheism and all that, they have gods, plural. Well, if there are gods, plural, that have a beginning, all the polytheistic myths have gods with a beginning. And there are restrictions on their powers. They don't all have the same powers. Okay, then they don't deserve the name gods. They deserve the name maybe super creature because they're higher than human, but not God. All right? And even the polytheists, like the Romans, for example, Hinduism, for example, as they changed their ideas slowly over time, they all came to the idea that there must be a God, an immense, infinite unity behind all the gods. Yeah. Math is invisible. You can say I have one apple, but you're calling it by the word one. You can't see the number one, the real number. You can write a representation of the number on a piece of paper, but you can't see the number one. But it really exists. All right? It's invisible. Something invisible exists that you can use. You can't see your thoughts either. But they exist, obviously. Now, the number one and thoughts are both invisible, but real. You can use them, and they're obviously finite. So now we know two things. We know that visibility connotes finiteness, and we know that invisibility can also be finite. So now let's use some basic logic that we get from math. If 1 exists, minus 1 exists. If A exists, minus A exists. Because the first thing you learn about math is that it's infinite. Not infinite in terms of each number, but infinite in terms of what they call progression. Because you have this finity that goes on and on and on and on in two directions, negative and positive. And you can't see a negative number, but it surely exists. All right? It's invisible, it's finite. Therefore, with finite means you can't test its existence and power. Okay, but if the finite exists, then so too does the infinite. And here, infinite means a stasis. Doesn't begin or end. Doesn't get any bigger or smaller. And that too is signified in math, and for that reason. Because if we know that an infinite progression exists, in order for infinite progression to exist, an infinite regression too, there has to be something that is non-repeating, that is truly infinite, meaning stasis. It doesn't change. Okay? So that's logic. You don't need a Bible. You don't need religion, of course. You never need religion. Just, that's logic, and that's math. Math is a form of logic, ultimately. Okay? So, the next thing we know, because we're talking to each other, is that personhood exists. And what do we know about personhood? We know personhood has negative qualities and positive qualities, and we vary in how we value what's negative and positive, but we all agree there is such a thing as negative and positive. Okay? Well, if personhood exists and it's finite and it has negative and positive qualities, then if A, that's the A, if A exists, then minus A exists. Meaning there's such a thing as personhood that isn't finite. It doesn't have finiteness as part of its own nature. Because how could a finite thing come into existence? This is true in math especially. A finite thing is dependent on the infinite thing for the finite thing's existence. It's one of the other first things you learn in math. You wouldn't have infinite progression or infinite regression, if it wasn't behind it something that was all-encompassing as a stasis that, as it were, was the ultimate containing set. Okay, well, the same has to be true of personhood, because what is personhood but a set of attributes? So your attributes and my attributes, positive or negative, are dependent on some infinite personhood, or our personhoods couldn't exist. Just like math finite can't exist unless there's some kind of infinite containing set that doesn't change. It's the same idea. Now notice, I'm not using any holy book. I'm not using any religion, because religion is just garbage. Religion is all man's hyperventilating. Okay. I just use math. Now, of course, I do math for a living. All right, that's my profession. But you know enough math to know that what I just told you is true. Okay? So, you don't need anything else to tell you that God exists. If there's finite personhood, there must be infinite personhood. That would have to be called God, for the same reason that in math. If there's finite math, there's such a thing as an infinite, wholly containing set that all finite math fits into, or it couldn't exist. There has to be something that doesn't change so that the things that do change can exist and can change. Which, of course, gets you to genetics. See, anything that genetically exists is dependent on something that existed prior to it. Genetically and mathematically, a thing has to come from something pre-existing. Okay? There's no such thing as new. There's only what in my profession is called permutations of something already existing. Something has to exist, and then because it exists, there are all kinds of changes of lesser things that come from it that then change. But everything is dependent on a base, and that base has to be infinite, and it has to be unchanging, and it has to be the ultimate containing set. So there you go. Infinite personhood must exist because you do. Now, obviously, God exists. It therefore makes sense however we want to explain it or try to explain it, evolution or whatever. Because God exists, everything else exists in some fashion, some form, some methodology we partly know or think we know. That's a logical conclusion. That's the only logical conclusion. Now, that doesn't solve your problem about, well, which definition of God? For that, you have to go to this unknown, infinite personhood and say, okay, somehow God exists, is infinite personhood, therefore is conscious. Okay, God, I need to know you. I have no idea. Are you the Hindu God? Are you the Muslim God? Are you the Christian God? Are you the Jewish God? Are they all the same God? Tell me. Then you'll know. Okay, save yourself a lot of wear and tear and just ask the ceiling, hi God, if you're really up there, I need to know you. Period. End of story, end of video. Bye.